One of Canada's best writers, Gary Geddes, he's also a poet, is with us. He's reading at the Vancouver Public Library on Monday, November 21st at 7 p.m. precisely. How has this changed you, this journey? In many ways, I'm sure.
It would be great to say that it was all a surprise to me. It wasn't a surprise. I've been to Chile during the dictatorship. I've interviewed human rights people, and I've been to a number of other hot spots of that sort. But when you sit there in front of someone like Nancy and you see the damage and you see this incredible wisdom and grace coming through somebody that's been traumatized like that, it gets into the bone marrow in a way that it hasn't before. It's just, you know, as I said at one point, it's important sometimes to tend the wounded rather than count the statistics or count the casualties.
Sure. And as you walk along and you observe the children and the shamans, just everyday life, how different it is.
It is, and there's such a vitality there, so much potential that's being wasted at the moment. I think that's one of the most painful aspects of it. And so I'm getting emails every week from people there that I met. Some I'm able to help, and some I can just give moral support to.
Right.
It's a wonderful experience, and as you know, as Kapuscinski says, this memory doesn't stop. It just keeps the film
the
of
Polish
it
poet.
Film of it keeps running in your mind.
Always.
Yes.
So is it as simple as a woman saying, all I need is a Singer sewing machine and life will be so much better?
No, it's not as simple as that. When Mabeda, the woman I interviewed in Congo who was raped by 7 soldiers and then raped again later, when she said that if she only had a sewing machine, she could at least have some kind of income to help her surviving nephews and nieces. It was easy enough to make that happen, but she was going back to her community where all of this happened. And it was such a volatile area. It breaks my heart to think that this would likely happen again.
And likely?
Likely, yeah.
It will. Child soldiers, housed boys and girls, still being recruited, still being trained?
Well, Joseph Kony is abducting regularly. He's now in Congo and Central African Republic and abducting children there, turning them into killers. The whole issue of justice was so important to me in my journey. I wanted to know whether the things that are happening at the International Court had any meaning to people like Nancy and people injured and traumatized. And you know, what difference would it make to her if Joseph Kony ended up playing ping pong with Radovan Karadzic, with music lessons, a 27-inch television, 3 good meals a day for the rest of his life in a cell, a beautiful cell in The Hague. And Nancy, I think, and so many others suggested to me that another kind of justice has to be considered, a different kind of justice, a local justice, a forgiving, restorative justice.
And do you think it's possible down the road, restorative justice?
Well, the South Africans have made a huge effort at that. The Chileans have had to do some of that. For me, trained in the West, I can't imagine having the grace to do that. But I was so impressed, and it just made me want to come home and talk to First Nations people about restorative justice. It's so important that we start thinking about this instead of, you know, the present government. What's the aim? It's to build more prisons. I think we need to do something on the ground instead of that.
What people write about Africa and the reality. So, I mean, I read Joseph Conrad. I'm sure you read Joseph Conrad growing up. But what is being written about Africa today and the reality for you? How different?
You know, the things that Conrad wrote about, the Belgian activities in the Congo, Leopold's travesties there, these things are still happening, but they're being done by foreign companies that are turning tribes against one another. In other words, they're using local people to create the damage that they would have created themselves in the original times.
Take me to Somalia, known as a nation of poets. No written language till 1972, really. What was that like?
You know, it was the Somalia affair that tripped the switch and finally got me to go to Africa, when the Canadian Airborne Regiment tortured and murdered Shadane Aron, this young Somali teenager. And I was stunned to think how ignorant I was and how ignorant we were to send this airborne regiment there with no knowledge, no real training. And these people have an amazing history. They're graceful. They're literate in a sense that any person who had any civilization would have these poems by memory. All these great historical poems.
Someone said, perhaps you, that poetry and camels are the top priority.
Yes, yes. When you think of that, why didn't we send Margaret Atwood and Michael Ondaatje instead of the Airborne Regiment?
So the Airborne Regiment may have been better. So who is doing good work on the ground?
Well, there are just so many people doing good work. I mean, amongst the Africans I met, one person that stood out was Victor Ochen in northern Uganda, running the Africa Youth Initiative Network. He and his three friends, Jackson, Peace, and Richard, are with two motorcycles, are scouring the whole of northern Uganda, bringing in victims for plastic surgery. And they, fortunately, have had some support from the International Monetary Fund, from the International Criminal Court, the Victims Reparation Program. In Congo, Kabuya Mohangi, this man works as a coordinating officer for various NGOs. He said to me, he was reluctant to speak, but when he finally talked, he was so passionate. He said to me, we live in the richest soil in Africa, but we die in rags. And this guy is putting his life on the line every day. Everywhere I went, there were Africans doing that kind of work. And NGOs, I know I've listed some NGOs in the book that I think are doing wonderful work. Probably worth having a look at.
What do you hope changes for people who read Drink the Bitter Root? Because we feel, as you know, we're far away, you feel helpless, you see the atrocities, you read about the atrocities. We don't have to hop over dead bodies.
I hope they'll be as moved as I was by some of these stories. That's why I brought them back, and feel that somehow the individual can still have some function in what's happening in Africa. There's no shortage of things the individual can do. And we need to start listening and thinking and educating ourselves about these foreign countries that we're exploiting.
Do you think social media will help? Is helping?
Well, this program has social media, that's helping. I think the newspapers in the United States and in Canada for a long time have been controlled by single groups, the monopolies, and have not been sympathetic to social change or any kind of progressive political action. So it's difficult. It's difficult.
Right, but now a child in the ghetto in New York can talk to a child in the Congo, one-on-one.
But how many children in the ghetto in Africa have a cell phone or a computer or anything? I mean, it's still difficult.
It's still primitive, but there is some of that happening, those bridges being built.
Well, we hope.
Some truth coming out.
Yes, definitely.
Well, nice to see you.
Thank you, Fanny.
Thank you. What is your connection to Gary Ross?
We were at the University of Toronto together. I think he was a student of mine, so you know, I can take credit for some of the warped mind that he has.
I see, you started it. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary Geddes, Drink the Bitter Root. He will be reading Monday, November 21st, 7 p.m., Vancouver Public Library.